Good day. Welcome to the Cory Morgan Show, second take. So this is going to come every Friday. This is a special series. There's just so much going on and so much going to be happening. And more than likely, there's going to be an election sometime in the next few months that we're going to come in every Friday for an hour or two and break down the federal issues, the election issues, have guests to cover these things, and just try to help everybody sort through the crazy mire, which is Canadian politics of today. So, I mean, again, I just couldn't keep up with my Wednesday show every week. There's just not enough time to hit it. So it's so important to get through these things. I should start, though, before we get on to things. This episode of this show is sponsored by New World Precious Metals, and they're based right here in Alberta. For years of inflationary money printing and rising debt, they've decimated the average Canadian savings. Look at your account, guys. That dollar's going down. Gold and silver are the only currencies that have held their value, and they have for thousands of years. Last year saw 30% gains. So New World Precious Metals offers you platforms to help grow and protect your hard-earned wealth with gold and silver. Check them out, guys. newworldpm.com. And it's buying local. And, helps us at the Standard as they are sponsoring us as well. So in a little while, I'm going to have Jen Hodson and Sean Polzer on. They're two of our main reporters here at the Standard in the Calgary office. They had quite an experience at the Mark Carney event the other night, so it starts to kick things off with this election type thing. So election, I'm going to start with that question. When's it going to be held? Well, you know what? We don't know. I mean, we got all sorts of speculation, but thanks to Canada's weird system under the new, or the Westminster parliamentary system, especially in a minority government situation, it could happen at any time. I'll start with the longest possible projection, because some people don't quite understand that either. The latest the election could possibly happen legally is October of 2026. So we're talking over a year and a half from now. A government can stay in for 5 years before they're constitutionally obliged to hold an election. Some people, they've been saying, no, the fixed election date is set for October 2025. Yeah, that's legislation. That doesn't mean anything. The government can overturn or amend or change that legislation anytime they want. They don't have to go on that date that they set, that they put into their legislation. It's just an arbitrary thing that they put. It looks nice. Alberta used to have a balanced budget legislation, for example. It made it illegal for the provincial government to run a deficit. That was put in back by Ralph Klein. And then eventually Ed Stelmach, when he was Premier of Alberta, wanted to run a deficit. So what did they do? Before the budget came in, they sat down, repealed their own legislation, and then just brought in a deficit budget. Well, the same thing could work with a federal election. So it doesn't matter what their legislation says, what the date's going to be. The only thing that really matters is the Constitution. Now, all that said, I think it's very, very unlikely it would drag out that long. I mean, the world's so bizarre, I won't rule anything out. But for them to manage to cling to power that long, as passive as Canadians are, I just don't see it happening. And people are talking about, an emergency being declared, things like that. Yeah, but, it's not going to do them any favors. And we're in such a strange period right now. So we've got to look at the factors, unfortunately not the factors of the needs of Canadians, but the needs of the Liberal Party, because that's what unfortunately it all comes down to. Trudeau finally, though reluctantly, resigned, and it forced this rushed, as far as these things go, rushed leadership race for the Liberal Party. It's a coronation for Mark Carney. We know that. It's clear as day. This isn't a race. There's no... It's only a matter of how wide the spread is going to be in a few days, not who wins. So Mark Carney will win the Liberal leadership race. Now, there's been some strange doublespeak coming out of Justin Trudeau on that, where he didn't say he was going to hand the reins over to Carney right away. We might be reading too much into that. I don't know. It's hard to say, but there is nothing legally that would force Trudeau to hand it over to Carney, which would create quite a mess if he didn't. But things are just so weird. Trudeau is quite enjoying the current tariff crisis, in some ways anyways, because he could stand there and be the leader. He could be the defender of Canada. He can be the man speaking for all of us, or at least try to model himself as such. He does not want to let go. But it looks like he pretty much has to. So let's assume, though, Justin, whether he likes it or not, is going to step aside. He's going to hand that to Mark Carney. Mark Carney will then become our Prime Minister. Welcome to Canada's system. Our Prime Minister will be a man who nobody in the public, aside from some Liberal members, actually got to vote for. He will have the highest position in the land without ever having stood even for a local election, much less in a general election. So Justin Trudeau's a lame duck. Carney, as far as I'm concerned, will be an illegitimate duck. I mean, it's fair enough you've got to give the man a chance to get in and, win the race and settle in, but he should face the electorate as soon as possible. But the Liberals won't look at it on a point of principle as to whether or not he should face the electorate as soon as possible. What they're looking at is is he most likely to win an election if he faces the public. Now that, if they conclude October, that's the next scenario I'm talking about, though, their fixed election date would be the best time to try and win re-election. And I can see this happening. I think it's the second most unlikely. The most unlikely is pushing it all the way to 2026, as I said. The second most unlikely, but still possible, is getting more likely, is that Carney and the Liberals decide they want to have him sit, even as an unelected Prime Minister, all the way until October, and then face the electorate then when their date in their legislation says they will. Now, to do that, it means that Jagmeet Singh, the leader of the NDP, has to flip-flop. He has to do an about-face, because Singh said repeatedly that he's going to vote to bring down the government at the first possible chance. And that chance will come 2 weeks after Mark Carney becomes the leader of the Liberals. But Jagmeet Singh is the weakest leader in the entire Parliament. There's no doubt about it. He's constantly flipped and flopped and stepped on his own tongue. He will be willing to cut a deal with the Liberals to stretch this out further. He'll ask for something, and this is where negotiations start coming along. What will he want, right? He's already wrung out this dental plan and pharmacare and other things that he's claiming as NDP victories, even though he's got a tiny amount of seats in the House. What would he demand to keep Carney in power until October? That gets scary, but both of them are desperate. You see, Singh is desperate. He doesn't want to go to an election, even though he's blustered and talked, saying that he'd like to go to an election. His party is broke. They're in serious, serious trouble. They haven't been raising money. And in the polls, they've been dropping into the toilet, mostly because people are saying, well, if Singh is just going to constantly march hand in hand with Justin Trudeau and the Liberals, I might as well vote for the Liberals. It's getting more and more difficult to distinguish the difference between Singh's NDP and Trudeau's Liberals. So people tend to go to the larger party. And now that this tariff thing's going on, they're going there even more. I'll talk about polls a little later in more detail. So if Singh and Carney cut a deal, and actually, that 2026 scenario is the same thing. It would take them doing something like that to pull it through. Because it's pretty clear the Conservatives are ready to go. They're going to vote non-confidence as soon as they can. The Bloc Québécois, very likely, and they've said as much as well. They want to go. Elizabeth May with her 2 seats, and she's been talking and blathering. That's been kind of almost funny. About negotiating a deal with the Liberals and the NDP, again, sort of to keep the nasty Conservatives out of power. In other words, trying to find a way to delay an election, because that's the only way to keep them out. By her own words, though, she said the Liberals and the NDP haven't been terribly receptive to her overtures so far. I mean, she's largely irrelevant, but when we get to the point of how tight elections can be, she does have a couple of seats, and her party does garner enough support in certain seats to potentially be a spoiler. I mean, she's Elizabeth May. She's kind of getting loonier as time goes by, but she still is a member of Parliament. She still is leading a party with 2 seats in the House of Commons, and that's what she's talking about. So, Singh and May and such cut a deal, drag this election all the way out till October. I guess I'll be doing this show on Fridays a lot longer. We'll see. They will use the tariff trade war going on as their justification. They'll say it's an emergency. They'll say it's so important that we can't afford to go to an election right now. Of course, the Liberals went to an election in the middle of COVID, which was, again, allegedly an emergency. So, I think it's the more unlikely scenario. Even the Liberals understand, Carney understands, if you're going to be negotiating on something like tariffs, a trade war, talking with President Trump, and you haven't even been elected, you're coming from a very, very weak position. You need a mandate. You have to have faced the electorate and won your position, even in a minority role. And so this government is due. I mean, people saying, well, it should be 4 years. Well, looking at our system, we got a minority government. Credit, I guess, due for their ability to cling to power. The average minority government in Canada only lasts 18 months. So, we're getting up to close to, it's going to be 4 years this fall. Justin pulled it off. He hung in there well beyond the average for this. But people are ready. They're due. That's what got Justin pushed out by his own party last December, because they were plummeting so low in the polls. Canadians were so sick and tired of Trudeau and the Liberals that they said, that's it, get out. Plus, it's the internal pressure. It's not external polls that really move politicians as much as when you start getting the internal pressure. Of course, Justin's own finance minister, Chrystia Freeland, basically turned on him. But there were other members of parliament, because they were all looking at it and saying, my Lord, I'm going to lose my seat. They're looking out for their own interests. And if eventually they realize that it's better to turn on the king than to sink on the ship with him, they'll turn on him. And that's what started happening. There was probably a heck of a lot of communication to Trudeau that we never heard, never saw, but it was starting to come from within the party, which finally pushed him into his little tearful resignation. Though it's been such a long, agonizing goodbye, that's what led to it. Now, Freeland, another interesting case. You look at some of these Liberals too, Anita Anand, that one is quite funny. She, a while back, said, I've decided, the usual stock line from a politician. I'm going to step out of politics to spend more time with my family. That's tiresome. Can you guys not come up with something more original? But the funny thing is, the Liberals, and again, as I said, I'll go into the polls a little more later. When the Liberals started surging in the polls, suddenly Anita Anand came out and said, you know what? I don't really like my family that much. I'm going to run again. So now she's back in again. She's running again. It shows just how crass and fickle and self-serving these Liberal politicians are. If the Liberals continue to sink in the polls, don't worry, she will bail out again. She doesn't care about Canada. She cares about herself. And hey, and that's not unique to just Liberal politicians. We got to be fair there. There's many self-serving politicians. That's hardly a new phenomenon in the world now, is it? But we'll see. So now the most likely scenario, what I think is going to happen. I guess if I think, it doesn't necessarily mean it's the most likely, but I suspect most people expect this is going to be the deal. Carney is going to have his coronation on Sunday, March 9th. That'll give him 15 days before Parliament sits again. And it was prorogued. And people have got to understand that, prorogation. So Trudeau shut down Parliament so the Liberals can get their own crap in order. Again, getting back to being self-serving, right? They want to avoid an election, so they shut down the business of everything so that they could select their new leader. Canadians are left in the middle of a tariff crisis without a functioning Parliament. Well, that timeline runs out on March 24th. The Parliament has to sit at that point, unless somehow they could convince the Governor-General to extend it. I don't see them extending the prorogation. It would just be too much. But again, the world's crazy. I won't say anything's impossible anymore. Very unlikely. So, Carney's looking at 15 days. The first thing that happens after a prorogation, that ends everything in Parliament. Every bill that was on, it died on the order paper. It's not going to go through. It's not going to be passed. It has to be started all over again. First reading, second reading, it doesn't matter. If it didn't make it to the royal assent, it's done. So it's got to go back in again. So the first thing that happens with a new Parliament is you need a speech from the throne. Just giving kind of a backgrounder on, our parliamentary system, I guess. The speech from the throne is written by the Prime Minister's office and given to the Governor General to read. It's not a speech from the throne. It's a speech written by a theoretical representative, or read by a theoretical representative of the throne. But they don't write it themselves. They're just a mouthpiece. Might as well get AI to read it, to be honest, but whatever. I'm not big on the figurehead of Governor Generals. I think it's a big, colossal waste of money and a slap in the face to democracy. But that's the way our system goes. She is technically actually our head of state. And, King Charles is her boss. We are a constitutional monarchy. But that speech will be read. And it provides, and that a lot of elections have happened this way, that speech often is a kickoff for an election. They can use that speech rather than actually opening Parliament for a session to start having debate and presenting bills and doing the business of government. They'll actually use it as a campaign kickoff. So they'll talk about all the wonderful things in the speech from the throne that they're going to do if given the mandate from Canadians. I mean, they won't say it that way in the speech, but they'll put out all their campaign promises in that speech from the throne. And as soon as it's done, the first act of the Prime Minister, who won't even have a seat, which is fair enough, we can't, it will be to go to the Governor General then and ask her to dissolve the Parliament so we can go to a general election. And that's the most likely thing that'll happen. That way they can kind of do it on their grounds, on their turf. They can set the stage. They won't have to face the humiliation of having lost a confidence vote. So they weren't forced into an election. And of course, they'll frame it, as every political communicator will, as it's just so important for Canadians that we must go to an election now, right? So it's critical. We're doing it for you. That's what's going to happen. The timeline will go out, and sometime in early May or so, we'll go to the polls. We'll actually vote. That's what I'll see happening. Now, if the other possible scenario will happen is the speech from the throne is followed by an automatic confidence vote. That means the House will vote on whether or not they have confidence in the House. If they lose that vote, an election's triggered immediately. So, again, if there's been no deal cut with Singh to stretch out that confidence vote, because that's the only way they'll pass it, then that's what's going to do it. And that would be more humiliating to the Liberals, right? Then you've been kicked out and forced into an election rather than having chosen the election yourself. So there's what I think is going to happen. And we're going to go to an election at that point and see what happens. We're certainly due for one. And it's going to be hard to pay attention to. So let's look at where we are sitting today in Canada with the seats. That's where we left off at the end of the last election anyways. And that's, from back in 2019. It's been that long, I believe. No, 2021. I've got the wrong one up. Okay, well, that's fine. That's 2019. I got to get a more up-to-date map for myself because, it was a minority in a short term. But the bottom line is, this map does show the colors of how Canada's laid out because it didn't change much between 2019 and 2021. We're looking at that trend of red in the east, dark blue in the middle, and kind of a mix on the west coast. And it's a minority government that has been hanging in there. And basically rejected by the West. So the numbers from the last election, I've got those, look at these things. I mean, the Conservatives came in, I'm looking at with 34% of the vote, 5.7 million votes. But they still came in behind the Liberals when it came to seats with 5.6 million votes. You get less seats than the Liberals, but they got more votes. You see, that's Canada's system. Again, it's about where your votes are concentrated, which is what's important. And the Liberals have a more efficient vote going on. So the Conservatives, yeah, sure, they got some higher numbers, but that's because those blue provinces you could see, Alberta and BC, are so solidly Conservative, it brings it up higher than it would be with the amount of seats it would get. So despite that, they're going to do really well in Ontario and Quebec, as they always do. And the election's held there. We got the Maritimes. Again, solidly Liberal, typically. PEI, Newfoundland, the rest, they are dominated by Liberal seats. A couple of specklings of Conservatives in there. Quebec, is an interesting province. Now, you get the Bloc Québécois. I mean, they only get 8% or so nationally in support, kind of, but they garner the most of the seats in Quebec because they're concentrated there. So it's not really an accurate measure to say how they're doing across the country, but they really do impact the politics of everything, don't they? Speaking of a party that punches above its weight. And then way down at the bottom, we got Bloc Québécois. We got them. We've got the Green Party, of course, Elizabeth May. We're getting down 2-3% support levels, but again, concentrated in a couple of areas. Elizabeth May with her seat in Salt Spring Island. There's a couple of Ontario ridings that are close. Mostly it's a BC thing. And then you got the People's Party. You've got why am I forgetting? Maxime Bernier. So what are they? They're sitting at the bottom, not even close to contention for a seat anywhere. At best, again, they could be a spoiler in a few spots. So where are they going to come from? I'll break down the leaders and the challenges for what they got going on. I'll start with Carney. He's going to be the presumptive prime minister going into this. And Mark Carney isn't really that known a quantity in Canada to political weenies like me and the rest of you out there, I'm sure, and the rest. He's familiar to us. He's been the governor of the Bank of Canada. He was the governor of the Bank of England. But most people in general, they've seen his name in the news a couple of times, never really paid much attention to that guy. But he's been well immersed politically, just not in the electoral realm. I mean, he was the head of the Bank of Canada under Stephen Harper. He's not always just liberal. But he's definitely been very closely tied to the Trudeau government. He's been a consultant for Justin Trudeau for quite some time. They've been tied at the hip. It was no shock that this was handed off, basically, to him. I just think that Justin probably thought he was going to wait a bit longer for it. Now, a couple of handicaps Carney has in that sense is, in some ways, not being known helps. If you're very heavily tied to a liberal government that people were clearly tired out with, you're just going to end up wearing that going in. So every other person who's running that liberal leadership race, the second place contenders, Chrystia Freeland, who was basically Trudeau's second in command for a long time, tweak, very strange lady. Not she's smart enough compared to many of Trudeau's cabinet members, but not really a contender for prime minister at this time. She, though, even though she broke away from Trudeau at the very end, if she became prime minister, she would be the next Kim Campbell because she just would. It's just another incarnation of the same thing that everybody was tired of and wanted to get rid of. They haven't really learned to despise her as much as everybody's gotten sick of Justin, but they would quickly enough because how could she claim she's going to be any different? She was side by side with Trudeau the whole time. But that's part of the challenges the Trudeau's the Liberals have. They got to campaign against themselves. And the carbon tax, that's the big legacy policy. That's the big one that Justin just would not back down on under any circumstance. That was his legacy policy. It's clearly dead. People despise it. It's terrible. It hasn't changed the climate. It isn't revenue neutral. And, the big killer for it was when Justin Trudeau carved out an exception for the carbon tax for maritime provinces to try and help his support out there. If it's so important that we're saving the world with this tax, how could you possibly just carve out a chunk because it's now more electorally expedient for yourself? He showed his hypocrisy, and that was the end of that tax. It's still with us, but they cannot campaign on having it. So basically, they've all turned around and said, we're going to get rid of it. But Carney isn't quite going to get rid of it. He's going to rebrand it. These guys haven't given up on it. They're just going to slap a fresh coat of paint on it. He's saying, we'll just put it on the heavy polluters industry. Industry right now that's reeling under the tariffs with Mark Carney. Well, the bottom line is, in the end, it always hits the consumer. You still pay the bill in the end. Companies are just companies. What are they going to do when the carbon tax gets slapped on all their inputs and things like that? They raise prices. And you can't get away from buying things. So you're still going to pay it. That's all you're going to get from Carney. But he's never been elected in the spot. He can try to play that to his advantage to a degree because, again, not being known, he's not necessarily associated directly with the liberal brand. So he's going to have to straddle the razor in a way to show himself as a loyal liberal leader, yet not part of the liberals that were there. I don't think he's going to pull it off well. We'll talk a little bit about that when Sean and Jen come in here, because I don't I don't think they think he's very strong. If you've got a strong candidate in an election, you put them in front of everybody as much as possible. You want them to win the love of the voters. You want them to inspire people. They hide him from people. He does very, very few long-form interviews, often on American TV. Look, you can get away with that during a Liberal love-in and leadership race, but in a general election, you've got to get out there and speak to people. Why are you guys afraid to put him out there with them then? That's not a good sign. It's really not a good sign. I'm sure they're training the heck out of him right now. The other handicap he has, and that's a reality in Canada, and that was found in the Liberal, and it's funny, the legacy media. I'll talk about them a little more later too. But during the debates, his French stinks. And I'll tell you, Carney's French is better than mine. Grant that. But mine, that's because mine's virtually non-existent. My Spanish is better than my French. My Yiddish is better than my French. But Carney is still, if you're going to be prime minister, Quebecers will not support somebody who does not speak French well to them. And he showed that in the debate. So I'm certain that every spare moment they've got right now, they're trying to up his training on French. One of the problems he had in the debate was he didn't understand the question. It's one thing to be able to speak slowly and get your rehearsed answers out in French. It's another if you can't understand the questions that are coming in. The Quebec wants you to speak French at them. So let's get on to the next person, Pierre Poilievre. Now, English is certainly his first language, and his name is very French, so Pierre Poilievre. But he was raised in Calgary. He's really got that nice broad appeal in a sense. He came from the West. Now he's in the East. He's been in Parliament a long time. He's fluent in French. I don't know how heavily accented it is, but he's absolutely comfortable with it. So that's not a handicap for him. One of the handicaps, for Poilievre is he's a career politician. He's been there for a long, long time. It's kind of a good and a bad. He's very experienced in the House of Commons, a very experienced legislator. But at the same time, you're going to wear a lot of things, right? People, they shoot at him. They say you've never held a regular job. You haven't been out in the world. Though, we shoot at Trudeau for similar things and things like that. He also was there for a number of items when he was in Harper's government in the past. The other thing was Poilievre is losing that carbon tax issue, even though, as I said, Carney is rebranding it because it's become so wildly unpopular. But Poilievre has been using it as a hammer for a long time to beat on the Liberals, and it's been very effective. Now that's gone. He has to pivot. He has to change. And the Liberals have found somewhere where he's weak. They found an Achilles heel for him because they're associating him with Trump. Now, Poilievre hasn't really been that close with Trump. He never has been a MAGA type of conservative, but still some supporters of the party show up with the MAGA hats and things like that. And right now, Trump is so universally loathed in Canada. And I know there's many Trump supporters who watch my show, but let's face it, the majority of Canadians are not impressed with Donald Trump right now. So Poilievre has to distance himself from that. And the Liberals are trying their hardest. I saw their campaign ad the other day, and it showed Poilievre right next to Trump. They put the face there, they put the face there. They took similar quotes and wrapped them together. Terribly unfair, but it's effective. It works. And he's going to have to be careful. He's going to have to distinguish himself from the Liberals, still keep the conservative base happy, and manage to, cause that wedge to get in there and make Canadians support him. One of the issues with Poilievre, it seems, is likability. A lot of people, he just grates on them. It's just the reality. Politics is a popularity contest. Have no doubt about that. So I don't find him as annoying as others do, apparently, but that's me. I'm biased. I've got my thing. We got to look at the voters. So he's got to get solid on a lot of those things. Now we got down the list, as I said, Jagmeet Singh. And he is in terrible, terrible trouble. His party is just sunk in the polls. They have no money to go to the election. The Liberals pulled hard left under Justin Trudeau, so basically they ate Jagmeet's lunch, so they have difficulty distinguishing themselves from Justin. And they're going into this, in a lot of trouble. They're going to lose what few seats they have. It's going to be an ugly, ugly election for Singh. You can see why he's not eager to get into it any faster than he has to. It'll be interesting to watch him try to even garner some attention in this thing. Go farther down, we got Blanchette. He's the one going into this election the happiest. He really is. He's strong. He's popular in Quebec. He's smart. He's been strong in the debates. He's, he's not going to win the general election. He doesn't care. He doesn't have to compete to the campaign to the whole country. He just campaigns to Quebec. So he's going to continue to do what he does. He's unapologetic with saying all I want to do is stand up for Quebec. And he will do what he does in there. So, I mean, among any of them, anyways, if somebody's eager for this election, Blanchette is the one. Now, getting farther down the lane, we got Elizabeth May. I mean, seriously. She's unhinged. It really takes... It really shows how ideologically bent you have to be to support her as a member of the House of Commons. She was the Green leader. And then she resigned. Then they had a leadership race, but they made a mistake. They elected a Jew. And yeah, that's really what happened. That's what got the Greens so upset that basically internal turmoil kicked out their own leader right after the last election because they were fighting over having a Jewish leader. They didn't like that. That's what the Palestinians think. How could we possibly do this? What an error. And then Elizabeth came and assumed the leadership again. Just a bizarre party. Yet, there's still enough kooks out there to vote Green to give her a seat and one other person. She's going to be there. She's going to be annoying through the debate. I guess good for comic relief. But she's not a contender for anything. I guess at best she can hold on to her 2 seats, she would hope. And she just gets more bizarre as time goes, though. So, and people like to make fun of her. I do now and then poke at it, for her drunken performance at a press gallery function one time where she just went off the rails and a conservative MP, I think it was Rate, kind of escorted her away from the microphone. But to be fair, hey, I'm a recovered alcoholic. I've done some stupid things at times when I was pissed. Yeah, she had her moment and it was embarrassing. I hope she doesn't have a chronic drinking problem. I don't wish that on anybody, but she is chronically nuts and that won't change. So we'll see that going through this. And finally, in the bottom, we got Bernier, Maxime. And it's just the People's Party of Canada has just been in decline for years and years. I think he would have been interesting maybe if he'd have won the Conservative leadership years ago. And he's just never been able to establish himself, turn it into something, and become a contender in these sorts of races anymore. He's now, I guess, trying to corner his spot by being pro-Trump in some ways, very anti-immigration. He's really catering to the far end of the right. Fair enough. It's your niche. But again, when I'm talking about seat efficiency, he doesn't have any. So he doesn't have support concentrated anywhere strongly enough that he's going to come out of this with a seat. They're already complaining a lot that they aren't in the debate. But to be fair, and again, Bernier's been on the show a couple of times. I like him. He's smart. But I mean, you can only have so many people in a debate, and kind of drawing one of the lines is having a seat or at least a viability for one. And he's just not in contention for it. So he's not going to be in the debates, and to be honest, I don't think he should be at this point. Build up that support, get to that point, that's fine. But in the meantime, he's just not a contender. He's going to be there in the election. Let's see what happens. I mean, if they do similar stuff like some of his crazy supporters did, throwing pebbles at the prime minister and things like that, Bernier might get it down to 1%. We'll see. But that's kind of the breakdown of where the leaders are sitting right now anyways, and things can change over a campaign. Now, I want to turn to a couple of our reporters said earlier. They were at an event recently. It was a Mark Carney event. And, speaking of the debates, for example, I mean, that's organized typically by media and so on, who's going to be in, who's not. They ask the questions. They do the other aspects of it. Our legacy media didn't speak up much when Mark Carney turned away some Western Standard reporters from an event. As I said, you can hide from the press during curated leadership type events and things like that, but it's difficult to hide from them in a general election. You're going to have to get out. You're going to have to talk to them. We're going to be there. We're going to be asking questions. You can't shut us out of everything. So let's get to it. We got Jen Hodgson and Sean Polzer in the studio. They were at the Carney event a few days ago. Welcome to my show, I won't shut you out. You always get a chance to come in here and babble at me or ask questions, but I'm not the one to question. What happened? I mean, we saw the videos. So they sent a letter to the Standard, like a press release or something like that?
Well, they sent it to Derek, our BC bureau chief out in Jared.
Yeah.
Didn't I say Jared?
Nice.
In beautiful Vancouver. Yeah. So
Cronian hang up on the boss over there.
Oh, did I say Derek?
Yeah.
Oh,
that's okay.
Yeah, you're right. No, they sent a letter to him, essentially, basically asking him to RSVP.
Yeah.
So we did. And obviously he's in Vancouver, so it was left to us to show up to, what should we call it, Versailles North?
Yeah, that banquet hall is interesting. I've seen the outside of it.
It looks like an ordinary strip mall.
Well, Sean and I were looking at because we were allowed into the lobbies.
Yeah.
It was more like a foyer. And I commented, it looked like Versailles. And Sean pointed out the peeling paint and the siding coming off of the wall and said, it's not quite. It's just the illusion.
Yeah. So, I mean, just to give people in those northeast Calgary, and it's a banquet hall. It's a thing with the Indian community up there. They hold huge functions, often weddings, gatherings, and so on. And they have those massive banquet halls that I love the Indian community, but boy, they love the gaudy and the colorful.
Definitely.
And George Chahal is Calgary's one and only Liberal member of Parliament, so he hosted Carney at this hall.
Mm-hmm.
He did, though that didn't help us any, even though Chahal himself and even asked about George. And we were just turned down. So when we first arrived, it was a very young staffer. She was only about 20. She was telling Sean that in the last election, she wasn't even old enough to vote. So that was in 21. And she tried her best to be helpful. And she reached out to her superiors to see if we could, in fact, go in. And so another woman ended up coming, and Sean spoke with her, and I was videotaping it.
But she got out of there pretty quick. It's like anybody that was in charge of anything there didn't really want to talk to us at all. So, we were kind of left.
But it seemed like she was going to let us in. The second woman.
It's almost like somebody overruled her.
It was like somebody overruled her because Sean was telling her that he's covered the prime minister before at these events, and that we have the invitation letter, and we showed them, and
she was the one who sent it to. She was the one who sent it to Jared because she was from the West Coast.
So the very same staffer that invited us, she walked away with the invitation letter that she had sent, and then they disappeared for like 25 minutes. All of the legacy media journalists were allowed into the main.
They're all walking by us, and then these three big dudes in turbans come out and
security. Time to leave. So, I mean, it sounds like it was an oversight in their part. I mean, if they'd been better organized, they never would have sent out the invitation to the Standard and avoided this which is still pathetic. But
I think the invitation probably came from the Carney people, and then, like you said, the actual function was being organized by the people on the ground, which included Chahal, and then who's the other fellow that was Jody Gondak's campaign manager that she fired?
Oh, Stephen the Weasel.
Stephen, yeah. And apparently he doesn't like us very much.
Stephen the Weasel Carter. I don't know why he doesn't like me. Weasel.
I don't know why he doesn't like me. I don't even know.
And Dave Naylor likes pulling up.
But that knows he doesn't like Dave.
Yeah, that cover from the Star Sun.
Yeah.
Just to show that Stephen's in good company, and with the porch pirate Chahal. It was chief of stiff, and it shows Carter, because multiple times Stephen Carter, just so folks know, he's a political strategist who latches on to some very senior political people, and he's paid more money in severance pay because he gets fired and he gets beautiful severance packages than most people make working for a living.
And he doesn't discriminate. He's got conservative, NDP, and now Leo.
He is a true political whore. He will wherever. This is something else to let people know. This one doesn't run on TV. I could be a little more unhinged than I am on other ones. But I mean, Stephen brings a visceral reaction out of me because I didn't realize he was there. But that would tell me right off where the sticking point came on letting us into that event then. But it also shows that Stephen didn't come out to tell you that. He sends a young volunteer.
Well, she was at the door. He actually sent 3 burly security.
Well, they were waiting for us because her hand was shaking while we were telling her, and she knew.
She knew what was going on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just, then they probably warned her and they probably said, oh, these people are bad. And,
Unfair to volunteers. It's just cowardly. I mean, get out there and just.
and even the rebels sent their smallest reporter. I mean, she's only about 5 foot tall. She didn't look very.
They used to have Adam. Adam could come in and kind of.
That might be a different story.
Or Bexley, I guess.
I mean.
He's in the race.
Just and hey, we got a friendly competition with Rebel, not a big thing, but they tend to like using events like that to kind of go bananas if they get kicked out. The Menzoid loves to make a scene and get wrestled out of the place or whatever. You guys had.
Yeah, we tried to be constrained and polite and patient. I mean, they did just have us milling around in this foyer while the other journalists could just waltz right into the other room. And so they waited until the foyer area was completely cleared before they sent those 3 security guards.
And they were expecting a scene. And I told Jen this is what they were going to do. And then I said, you notice that undercover cop, to the right? She goes, what undercover?
So there's between RCMP, and it's for me distinguishing them between security guards. They're in plain clothes. They have the wire in the ear, but Sean said, no, that is clearly a
and he's armed. He's got a gun. And he's pointing to the door, and it's like, okay.
I don't fault from having heard that. There is a political leader at a function who's probably going to be prime minister in a little while. You never know what kind of bar might show up. You should probably have,
I suppose,
a member of the police there. But I mean, you guys weren't out to.
And we were bugging the Rebel reporters like, gee, you get arrested like 4 times a week, Why aren't you up there?
They got a card to put up. If arrested, here's my lawyer.
He's standing behind a 20-year-old, intern in a plaid shirt and a rugby jersey, and we're standing behind the Rebel reporter here.
I mean, as I was saying earlier, it doesn't bode well for Carney, though, right? That doesn't show a strong,
and it's not the first time,
confident leader. I mean, you got to deal with media members you don't like.
Absolutely,
and.
So even Trudeau. I mean, I get along with his press people, and I had a similar kind of situation where he was at SAID, and they didn't tell us where he was, and we got tipped off, because Dave knows there's everybody in town. So I showed up and I walked in behind Rick Bell, who slipped and fell on the pavement, and we helped up and hauled in. But then, I introduced myself to Trudeau's press people, and they were really nice. They made me up a badge, and they let me in, and I had to go through the, when you go see the Prime Minister, you get quarantined because he's got dogs and a SWAT team.
Yeah.
And everybody, but, it wasn't a big deal. And Trudeau answers questions, maybe he doesn't like the questions.
And maybe he doesn't
like you as a reporter.
For them directly, he'll offer some word salad, but...
Well, and he knows Rick personally, it seems.
Well, I mean, if you want to get the conference over with, you just let Rick do his preambles, and, there's only going to be 2 questions.
But Rick asks tough questions. He'll be, he doesn't
once he gets to the question.
Not a Trudeau fan.
No. He's made no bones about that.
But so you kind of have to admire Justin a little bit for that, at least.
Yeah. I mean, relationships with media have changed, though, from how they were in the past. Like, if you look, and conservatives aren't necessarily a lot better. I mean, a lot of us loved watching Poilievre munching an apple while getting loaded questions from another reporter. But at the same time, doing something like that would have been unimaginable 15 years ago, no matter who you were and how unfair the reporter might have been.
True.
And you get Trump, he's kicking other media outlets out from the White House press office.
And Carney's inside complaining about Trump, but yet he's doing the exact same thing.
Yeah, it's not a good trend all around, really. I mean, from all of the I guess maybe it's a sign the media is getting a little more biased too. But it's
well, it doesn't work. Rachel Notley did the same thing in the election. Barred us and went to like absolute ridiculous lengths, like. They were intimidating Jonathan Bradley, Mighty Mouse. And,
right. But the nice thing is Jonathan never gave up, though. He was
it stood his ground.
Yeah. But, yeah.
But I mean, it just makes you look like a bunch of assholes.
Yeah, outwardly, yeah.
And like, what is he afraid of? So it's going to be the content of our questions.
Well, that's it. And we're certainly a conservative-leaning outlet, editorially. But I mean, in the news,
I checked. There's nothing wrong with that.
News is the news, yeah. But I mean, every outlet has, the Red Star is definitely.
Well, I mean, we have pretty diverse opinion, and even in this newsroom, I would say, we all have, we definitely have a conservative, outlook.
Propensity, but it's not,
But there's kind of a spectrum. I tell these guys it's kind of like autism, There's a spectrum
of where we land on it. But yeah, it's just, I mean, so you're gearing up, though. We got an election campaign we're pretty sure coming, probably within a couple of weeks or a few weeks. I mean, he can, other parties can keep us out of their events. That can happen. But if they're public press events, they're not going to be able to hide forever.
Well, I don't know, because I was thinking about that, because it seems to me that they're probably organized by the riding associations on kind of a local level. And George Chahal being, so what, did Boissonette resign? That means George is like the only Liberal.
Oh, no, he's still in there.
Oh,
He said he's going to run again.
oh, is he?
Yeah, both the Randys.
Oh, okay.
Or all three of them, or however many. Yeah, no, he got out of cabinet, but Boissonneau even said he's running again in Edmonton.
Okay.
Just for folks who haven't followed that, Randy Boissonneau is a member of Parliament in Edmonton, a Liberal who
From Warrenville.
very scandalous with a number of things. It sounds like he'd faked being of Indigenous heritage. He a lot of conflict of interest type of things happening with this company, and then bizarre excuses claiming it was another Randy, not me, and everybody mocks him roundly. Yet at the same time, he said he's running again, which shows that there's probably not a big lineup of people who want to make that go for them.
And how short of a memory that the public can have too.
Well, we'll see at the polls.
Yeah, you were up.
That's and George Chahal, who, so, since Carter's around, it'll be even harder on him, but there's truth to it. I mean, the last federal election, his little claim to fame was he was caught on a doorbell camera stealing conservative flyers from a mailbox, so he's called the Porch Pirate. That was, again, humiliating. I mean, normally a Liberal member of Parliament in Alberta will get an automatic cabinet seat because they just need to try and get regional balance. Chahal never got a seat because...
And Randy did.
Yeah, because he was just too immersed.
Well, George was also the soccer coach of my partner's kid, right?
Mm.
So we were at an event a few weeks back at Sade, and, George happened to be there, and he walked up to Elena and said hi, and, and Elena introduced me, and I was wearing my Western Standard jacket. But we shook hands. And,
Well, sure. He's been around a while. He was a city councilor. He was
city
for
councilor.
one or two terms, I think. And,
yeah,
it's not an unknown quantity.
So the other day, I kind of saw him in the back. I was like, hey, George. Right. But it was like, well, if I'm blind, you don't know.
Not in that context.
Yeah,
So feel
who your real friends are if they walk right past you on the sidewalk, right?
Yeah. Well, we'll see how things unfold as the election gets rolling, though. I mean, again, you guys are from the reporting area. I mean, if it's me showing up, okay, Cory's a prick, and he's going to ask something provocative or unfair, try and catch me or something. I don't know if I'd necessarily do. I don't go to those things. That's not my role for those kinds of reasons. I'm an opinion guy.
He stays at home at night. No.
I don't have much broad satellite either. But
It is true what you say. We're not going to try and make a supply or do something outrageous, right? We just want to report and also pose those questions that would be important to a conservative audience. So if he were to become the next prime minister, he'd be governing over conservatives and liberals alike. We're all Canadians. So to accept questions from all sides of the spectrum.
Well, and I think the reason Derek sent me is because I'm not a guy that gets into these kind of, petty little partisan scraps with people. I write about oil and gas. It's like sports, right? But, even in sports, so at the Herald, we had hockey players on the Flames that just refused to deal with certain reporters, right? So you just send a different reporter, that's all.
Yeah.
Not in this case, I guess.
They couldn't really ban the outlet, you know what I mean?
Doesn't do them really any favors. I mean, if anything, it makes us even crabbier at them. Guys like me, they get no more likely to be mean in my editorials and commentary that I...
Well, and some of these hockey players, they get run right out of town, like if they don't get along with people, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
that's half the game. They're getting traded.
Yeah, in hockey, believe it or not, it's sports, but you
have to get along.
You got to keep their fans happy. I mean, they pay your bills. Yeah. And out here, the electorate, they vote. I mean, there could be swing voters, but as I was saying earlier, Polyev, tends to be popular in Alberta, but he doesn't endear himself to everybody. There could be swing voters who read the Standard and say, I might be a minority, but you need every vote you can get.
Sure. And as reporters, I mean, we're supposed to be objective, but we're still allowed to vote. I'm a citizen, I'm a reporter, but I'm also a citizen. So, and I have an opinion. Like, maybe I can't always say exactly what I think about people.
Between the lines.
I hold back a lot myself, actually.
Well, often these politicians speak for themselves, too, with their words and actions. We don't really have to put too much commentary in our articles to really just show what's going on.
I was holding back in my column. I was trying to mince it and be a little diplomatic, but there was kind of an uncharacteristic...
it speaks for itself, though.
Righteous rage. Remember that guy.
I mean, it's an interesting kickoff for things anyways. I mean, we know they're going to be doing the the circuit over the course of the campaign, and we're going to have Carney here in campaign mode in Calgary at least probably once. We'll see.
Well, he claims he's from Edmonton. I mean, you know what? He would have went to school in Edmonton about the same time I did. And Fort Smith,
Well, that's been.
you know what? There's I don't know how to couch this in terms. There's not a lot of white people that come from Fort Smith.
No,
And if you do, it's because you're first either in the Army or in the RCMP. Do you know what I mean? And then, of course, he went to school in Edmonton. So he went to the University of Alberta. He would have went to the U of A probably about the same time I did. Yeah, Fort Smith. Fort Smith, you have to fly in. I don't even think there's a road out there.
It's a winter
In the
road.
summer. In the winter.
Yeah, in summer you got to fly in.
You might have been there.
I haven't been
You're either an oil patch worker.
Been in the neighborhood, yes.
Yeah.
So
Fort Chip.
yeah, those sorts of spots. Yeah, well, they'll all claim to have been everywhere and claim to relate to everybody on everything. That's true taste. That's
True
the
Canadian.
usual thing. Paulie's going to come here and talk about how he was born in Calgary, and he's going to speak in Ontario, and he's going to talk about how he's been in Ontario for 20 years, and you just
And he's
play
got
that.
perfect French, yeah.
Yeah, you played the game.
Even though Polyev has 3 passports. And, he's English, he's Irish, English and Irish, square that one, and Canadian.
Actually, I didn't know the Irish one.
Yeah. Yeah, Ireland.
Well, they'll probably bring it up over the course of the
Well,
election.
because Carney gets a lot of flack for holding 3 passports, but if Polyev has the same,
No, I'm talking about Carney, not Polyev.
As far as surprised, because he had Poliev, so I thought that's why I said I didn't know he had a.
right.
Okay. Well, I mean, that's
No.
and that's something that they do hit with Ignatieff. They hit quite hard. I mean, that was an effective campaign when he ran against Harper. For people who don't remember, he was, Ignatieff was a smart guy and so on, a liberal candidate, but he was in the States for most of his time as an academic. Came back to run.
What was his passport? Was it British?
I believe he's American.
Oh, was it American?
And it was always, just visiting. That was the thing they kept saying. Oh, he's just visiting here to be. And it was kind of true, because once he lost, he's been gone.
It seems to me Stéphane Dion was, did he not have European citizenship as well?
He might have, yeah. But he was very Quebec entrenched too, though. But, wow. It's a foolish game. But I mean, at a time when we were talking about patriotism so hard as we are right now, I can see Skyler using that knife.
There's kind of an irony there, right? Because we've gone from the carbon tax election to now it's going to be the tariff election, right?
Yeah.
And everybody's going to be trying to outdo each other to see who's the most Canadian.
Yeah, well, interesting times. For us, I mean, we thrive on this, or I do anyways.
Well, it's interesting.
Makes the vein pulse in my head, but at the same time, I enjoy it.
Seeing the approach that all of the leaders have across the country, federal and provincial alike, you see this. We want to fight back. We want to retaliate. These are unjustified tariffs. And yeah, fair enough, but it's becoming this rallying cry that we hear across the board. And I was talking to Poilievre's office yesterday, asking them about this because their rhetoric sounds actually really similar. And they said that Poilievre was the first one to come out with the fighting back rhetoric. So, so we can go back and look at timelines.
Well, and getting back to media, actually, for part of it, I mean, people were asking the other day with big responses to it, and they said, well, I never heard Poilievre's response. Somebody said he did do a long presser and conference, but CBC gave the whole thing to Trudeau and even Singh, in other words. Yeah. So
just the other day, Poilievre was giving a press conference, and you could see him talking, doing his press conference in the background of the CBC broadcast, while CBC had some analyst come on talking about Premier Ford's announcement that he had made moments before that. So they really don't prioritize Poilievre and his party.
No, they don't. And that's the only other thing before I let you go. I mean, have you heard from any other media members? We had that independent press gallery, kind of condemn our being shunned from this. But most legacy media probably hasn't said a peep about...
No legacy media.
Often media used to rally the horses. I mean, even if it was members they didn't like, I mean, they kind of, hey... You don't start pushing media members around because we need our access, but...
Yeah, no, nothing. The Rebels shared our videos around on social media, but nothing from legacy media.
Well, I have to say that I was interested at some point in what Carney would have had to say, because I do consider myself a thoughtful journalist, I wouldn't have minded,
It's not about asking trick questions or gotcha moments.
After Tuesday, I just kind of said to hell with it. I wasn't interested at all. I didn't tune in. I didn't watch. What little I watched of the debates was about 5 minutes. It was just totally unimpressed because it's just all canned.
Well, that was in the lunch.
There is no policy thing in there at all. So, I mean, I don't know that anybody really knows what he stands for.
No, well, and speaking of debates, I mean, that was the Liberal love, and it's going to be interesting with, even as much as the legacy media loves the Liberals in many ways, the French debate. For the first time, I'm really going to watch that closely in the general election, just because I got a feeling Blanchette and Poilievre are just going to beat Carney like a red-headed stepson, because his French is weak,
branch.
and they're going to speak fast, and they're going to speak, because it's hard to understand it.
Carney's going to be scratching his head.
And
And when Carney does attempt to speak French, he says something completely different than he does in English.
yeah,
Both sides of his mouth, one
So-
French, one English.
I'm sure that every spare moment they got, they're just
Cliche, really.
training him on that French, because boy, it's gonna be a rough night.
Duolingo. I've got the app. It's pretty cool.
Maybe you'll call in sick. So the world's crazy enough, nothing surprises anymore. All right, well, I'll let you get back to your desk, guys. I really appreciate
You could probably see us in the back. Yeah.
Yep, we're right there behind.
Yes, a long commute to the studio here.
Our fingers up where we hard there.
I know there's more to write on, and we'll check in again, I'm sure, as the election progresses.
Excellent.
It's great.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Cory.
Hey, this is the time I like to remind everybody, too, the reason we've got these reporters going out there and beating on those closed doors and being shunned and turned away. They still put out a lot of great content. Of course, they're working their butts off, is because you guys have been subscribing. So we don't take tax subsidies. We refuse to. We pride ourselves on that. We rely on you. And it's $9.99 a month, $100 for a year, guys. It keeps this broadcast going. It keeps those reporters out there. And so if you've subscribed already, thank you very much. We really do appreciate it. And if you haven't, come on, westernstandard.news/subscription. Take one out, just like when you used to get a newspaper delivered to your house. It keeps us rolling. And again, we have to, just express our appreciation for it. And we talk about the media. This is one of my worries going into this election. As I said, we have a slant, in a sense, as a conservative outlet. It doesn't mean we misrepresent, though, or do other things. Every outlet has a bit of a leaning. But the problem we got right now is it's polarized in that we've got so much subsidized media going on out there. We've got the CBC, of course, and one candidate, Poilievre, talking about defunding him. It's very much in their interest to keep the Liberals in power. And we've got other outlets that are reliant on a number of other subsidies to keep themselves going. And by the same thing, they are very motivated not to have Poilievre come in and win this election, which is a dangerous place to be. And it doesn't mean necessarily that the reporting will be bad, but you look at it now in a different lens. You're not sure anymore if they're being fair, if they're being self-serving. And it's a bad place to be. That's why independent is so important, no matter what's left or right. I mean, even Canada Land, although I think they take some subsidies, but I mean, new media, it's the future. It's where we got to be. So again, subscribe, keep these things going so we can get out there and keep holding him accountable. All right, I'm going to turn to our news editor just to kind of run down the week and the top issues and things like that. He's the guy who really keeps things going, sending these guys out so they can get turned away at places by Stephen the Weasel Carter. Dave Naylor, how you doing?
Stephen the Weasel Carter. That brings back memories.
Oh, yeah.
And stuff. I'm doing great, Cory. How are you?
Good. Just
Good.
getting into election mode. And as I said, I'm enjoying this format where I can, just get a little more relaxed. And
Congratulations
talk about that
on the new show.
Yeah,
Do you have
thanks.
a title for it yet?
This is Cory Morgan show, Second Take.
Okay. That's all right.
Yeah.
That's all right. Did you screw up? Take one?
We'll see. Get the feedback. It depends on who you ask.
Yeah. So, what do you say about the week? Every day's an adventure, right? With Trump and the tariffs was the big news all week, and whether or not he was going to take them off. He's given Mexico a month-long break because he says he gets along with the Mexican president, and we all know he doesn't get along with our prime minister or the governor, as he's referred to. So tariffs has kept us busy, and the Liberal leadership. Mark Carney in town. I know you had Jen and Sean probably talking about that and how he refused to answer our questions and hid behind the skirt of a 20-year-old student. And a lot of stuff about him basically lying, fabricating stuff that he said, like he helped Paul Martin balance the budget and stuff like that just were not true. He seems to have some kind of problem telling the truth. And there was an interesting story on when he was the head of Brookfield Capital or Investments or whatever the heck it was. They avoided, when he was the chairman of it, they avoided billions and billions of dollars in tax that was owed to the Canadian government. and Carney's company shifted it offshore. I think to Tonga or someplace like that, and the NDP, an NDP MP, called it obscene. That in just 1 year they've avoided paying $6.5 billion in taxes. I mean, how many schools could that have built, or nurses hired, or stuff like that? So,
It doesn't give a good example of a
No.
potential prime minister coming forward.
no,
And,
no.
I mean, it's interesting in that, he's got a long resume. He's a smart man. But I think some of what's showing, though, he's not a campaigner. That's a different art
No.
form. You could speak at a press conference, but electoral politics is a different animal. He's having to do some adjustments. You got to watch what you say and think on your feet.
Absolutely, and I think Poilievre would just destroy him in a election debate. I think, but I should say he's not a strong man, but he's not a dumb man, but he comes across as lacking energy, right? I think
He's a banker.
Yeah, he's a banker. He's a banker. And now we're focused on the last days of the Trudeau regime, thank God, and it's going to be an orgy of appointments between now and Sunday. He's reportedly going to appoint dozens of liberal-leaning judges. Any sort of government board that he's going to appoint hundreds and hundreds of people in the last days of his prime ministership. So, that type of pork barreling does not go down well with Canadians, I don't think.
Oh, well, when Justin's dada did that, John Turner really got slaughtered in the election because of that. I mean, that was the turning point when Brian Mulroney just wasted him in the debates.
You, sir, had a choice,
Yeah.
I think was the quote. And it really, it sickens people. So I think that bounce that you may have seen Carney get when he first started the leadership campaign, I think that's going to hopefully widen a little bit now. There are reports that the Liberals have already hired an Air Canada plane to be their campaign jet, and it's all decked out now in Liberal colors. And all the big wigs in the Conservative Party have been summoned back to Ottawa all week, and they're no doubt plugging away. So Carney gets coronated on Sunday, and he's expected to call an election within a week. So the typing of your new show is quite good.
Perhaps. We'll see. I mean, yeah, I started the show with my speculations of when it's going to be called. I figured he might go 2 weeks and go down on the throne speech just as it's a nice campaign kickoff, right? Because that's happened before.
But then you have to call Parliament back, right?
Yeah, for a day, just to have your campaign kickoff, and then you go back to the...
I don't think we'll see him as prime minister in the House of Commons.
Okay.
I just think, it's... He's looking at the polls, and they haven't been this close in a very, very long time.
No.
So the longer he doesn't call it, the more people will get angry over Trudeau's last days and stuff like that. So
Strike while the iron's
yeah,
hot.
I think it's going to be sooner than later. But who knows? You may be right.
Well, we'll see, but you'll be covering it hard and heavy. I guess we will all watch. It'll be Sunday evening when they announce the...
Sunday evening, our Jen Hodgson will be covering it, so we'll have of the breaking news story up on the site, and additions all the way through from his no doubt victory speech.
Right on.
We'll see if he can garner up some energy for that.
Well, yeah, show some bloody animation. Maybe they'll
Kind of life or something.
just give him a rail before he gets up there and see if it worked for Freeland.
I would do Elizabeth May and just get hammered.
Yeah, whatever. Politics is so weird. I can't help but love it.
You know what? Every day has been just amazing and historic. Who'd have thought he would have kicked the leader of the Ukraine out of the Oval Office? And people bitching that he's wearing his military uniform, which he's done for the last 3 years. It doesn't matter who he visits, he wears that uniform.
G.I. Jolie was wearing her military.
Yeah, and people forget Winston Churchill came to the White House in his military garb, and nobody questioned that, did they? So it's weird. It's you just don't know what's coming.
No, well, keeps us rolling. All right.
Keeps rolling and keeps the readership going skyrocketing.
Well, I appreciate the rundown. I'll let you get back to your desk. I know you got a long, dragged-out meeting there earlier.
Yeah, well, you've been in a few of those too.
I have. All right. I'll let you get to whatever you've probably been backing up all that time. So.
Yeah, I think I got a couple hundred emails to go through now.
All right. Thanks for the check-in, and we'll talk to you later, Dave.
Thanks, Cory.
All right. is our news editor, Dave Naylor. And yes, this just keeps going and going. But again, it's better than dead news times, at least from our self-serving aspect of things, right? So let's look at a little more on what's going on then. I'm going to go into what the top issues are and what's been considered to be the top issues. And because that's what they're going to campaign on. As I said, with Poilievre, he was hitting hard on the carbon tax, but he kind of lost that now that all the Liberals have changed their mind and said they're not in favor of carbon tax. So this was a large poll done by Abacus. It's David Coletto. They're one of the better pollsters out there for sure. So number one, you can see right on the top of the list, rising cost of living. 61%. That's what people were asked, what were their top three issues. 61% of people said the rising cost of living. The bottom line is that's a reality in politics. That's where the woke have been really screwing up this last few years. Paying the bills ends up coming first. It doesn't matter. When times are good, you can start messing around with other stupid little policies, vanity projects, virtue signaling, all that. But when you can't make the rent, when you can't buy the groceries, then you start getting concerned. So the cost of living is way up on top. Number two is Donald Trump and his administration. That's quite something, because that would have been an issue that 6 months ago didn't exist on the issues. Now it's number two by a long shot. Again, with the tariff war, with all of the other stuff going on, of course, and it's kind of pretty tightly tied into that rising cost of living. Number three, we've got healthcare. That's always, again, in the top areas of polling for people with issues. Provincially, usually it's the bigger one, but I mean, it's still a big issue to people in general. That's 38% of people felt that was up top. Housing, affordability, and accessibility. So that kind of gets right to the top of that rising cost of living again. Everybody's worried about their wallet. That's the reality. So people, when they're campaigning, they're going to be trying to find a way to say, how are we going to make you more wealthy, or at least less fearful that you're going to go broke? Because the next one below that is the economy. So it's not often actually when we see it laid out so solid. That means people are pretty scared for their economic well-being. They're worried about their wallets. And tax hikes, big government programs, things like that, I don't know if those are going to sell that well. Now, Justin Trudeau, as Dave said, he's going out the door and he's going to appoint a whole whack of people to a bunch of positions as favors to all his friends and buddies before he goes. Another thing he's going to do, maybe he's done, I don't know, but legacy projects is a big thing for when prime ministers are going out. So he just announced and entrenched this daycare program just massively. I mean, so he really wants to have something, the Justin Trudeau daycare. I can imagine, because, I mean, Justin still is probably inclined to finger painting and other such hobbies, so he can relate to those kids there. But it's not the government's job to raise our bloody kids. Make things affordable, and we can afford daycare. We can afford to have kids at home or do our choices. But he's leaving with that big bomb, as far as I'm concerned, sitting there. So we'll see. And we'll see what else he tries to entrench on his way out the door. Because, again, it's going to be hard for Carney. He's going to have to wear those things. Justin can throw these out, and then he's just going to leave right off into the sunset and do whatever the heck he's going to do. Another scary thought, just to keep people awake at night. Look at how history tends to repeat itself, right? It's pretty interesting, really. I mean, we got, again, another Trudeau. We got another crisis, all these things going on. When Pierre Trudeau resigned the first time, don't forget, he wasn't gone. Everybody was sick to death of him. They were tired of him. He resigned. And then he came back not long later, and he managed to get 4 more years beating on us. He wasn't out the door for good, so we had to deal with him resigning twice. Will Justin come back in a year or two? Scary thought. But, nothing's impossible anymore, right? Things are so nuts. All right, going farther down on the top issues facing Canada. Getting down now, 24% is immigration. That's kind of interesting, because that was a hot issue for quite a while. That was one of the areas where the Liberals kind of backed down a bit, because when we got the housing crisis really going and the healthcare crisis, so those things that are higher up, people did realize, because the Liberals were pumping in massive amounts of immigration and immigrants, and we just didn't seem to have the ability to maintain them. So, of course, it puts a run on the cost of living, whether it's rentals or buying a house. It makes it more difficult to get into health facilities. And most Canadians do understand we're an immigration-based country. Immigration is very important. We pride ourselves in being a place for people to come and make a new life and get here and settle in. And in fact, again, it's very important for our economy to have that going on. But if you have too much of it, it causes a lot of problems. You have to make sure that you're integrating it. So they overplayed it, and it hit onto all those other areas. But it has dropped in itself as an issue on the top of Canadian minds. So 24% saw that as one of their top 3 big issues. Now, here's one of the other interesting ones. Climate change and the environment has dropped to 16%. This was where Justin Trudeau built his reputation. This is where his legacy was going to be. He's going to save the world from climate change. He's going to save all the fluffy bunnies from that sun burning all the forests down. And he was going to carbon tax us all into a better place. He was going to shut down the evil, nasty oil field. And it's down to 16% of people even find it in their top 3 issues anymore. Interesting for Elizabeth May as well, right? So that's really dropped. And that's what I was talking about. When it comes to these types of issues I'm going to get to as we get farther down, when people have trouble paying the bills, those issues drop. If you're in an economic boom, that's when you can start talking about all these fluffy things, building windmills and sticking solar panels on top of taxis or something. Now it's down to 16%. This one, here's the one that got lower, though, that I really, okay, fair enough. I didn't expect this to happen. Crime and public safety is 15%. Like, an issue that the Liberals have been beat up on a lot for, and I think rightly so, is, we got a lot of criminals out on bail, getting out harming people. And, that, along with, the things people want is they want a solid economy, they want to be able to pay their bills, but they also want to feel safe. They want to be able to think that their kids can get to school without getting harmed. They want to think themselves can get to work without, being assailed somewhere. But people aren't seeing that as a top issue in their top 3 right now anyway. So, okay, surprising. Another one, job security and unemployment. So that one's kind of interesting. People don't think they're going to get laid off. That's down to 12%. People don't think they're going to get laid off, but they're worried about being able to pay the bills. That's what's going on. They're working, but they're falling farther back. They're not worried about being unemployed. They're just worried about making the car payment or buying the groceries. That's the problem. So it's an interesting thing going on. Below that, we get inequality and poverty. Now, people are worried about poverty. They're worried about inequality, but it gets into the DEI thing. There's been a backlash, diversity, equity, inclusion, inequality. People want equality. They do. They want everybody to have the same starting point, at least. It's just that we don't have to guarantee the end point for everybody. And people have soured on that. That's getting into the woke politics. That's where we saw some of the backfiring going on. And that's where we're down to 13%. And bear in mind, these are core liberal issues, right? When you get into that sort of stuff, this is where the Liberals used to really earn their votes, or thought they did. And we get down now to the threat posed by China and Russia. That's only 7%. The foreign interference file. This is the one that really was the beginning of the end for Justin Trudeau, when things finally, one of the scandals that finally caught up with Trudeau was the interference thing, was Chinese interference in elections and nominations and in politicians. And they ragged the puck and they dragged it out, and they had their rapporteur and all their garbage and everything else, and finally had this sad little hearing and said it's a nothing burger, and it apparently worked. Because I don't think people have given up on worrying about those things. They're just tired out. Fine. China's over. Well, it's not, guys. Actually, it's not. But that's still, as far as the voters are concerned, it is. And actually getting straight direct to the Chinese election interference, that landed at 2% in the polls with what people are concerned of. So they do see that issue as being behind them right now. I think they shouldn't, but it doesn't matter what I think in this case. This is what campaigners are looking at. This is what they're thinking about. What's going to get people out to vote for them? And this Chinese election interference, again, this is where Poilievre gets a bit more of a disadvantage, because that was a very effective area for him to really hit the Liberals quite hard. And he's lost that because people apparently just aren't that concerned about it. Another strong area for Liberals, Indigenous reconciliation. That now is 4% of people see that as a big priority. People are kind of tired of that. The Kamloops residential school hoax, and it has been a hoax, guys. And people are starting to more openly say it. It's not saying that the residential schools were a good idea. It's not saying that the residential schools were nice places. It's not saying that people weren't abused. But it is saying that it was a load of baloney that 215 children were buried at that bloody school. It was a load of crap when the flags were put at half-mast for 6 months over a hoax, because they never even dug a hole. Where people are finding out now that band got given $12 million to go look and never looked. They just pocketed the money. They won't tell us what they did with the money. So yeah, and unfortunately, because that makes people cynical. because there are other areas that we've really got to work on in First Nations people and Indigenous areas. But when you have a hoax like that, people get sour, and now it drops towards the bottom of the priority issues for people. And that was through a poll. Polls are polls. There's lots of things you can do with polls to make them look the way you want them to look or not. Now, I'm going to bring up projections. The polls have been bouncing around like a ping pong ball lately. And right now, this is from a site based on March 2nd. There was actually a stronger poll for the Conservatives since then. As I said, seat distribution versus popular votes is a difficult thing to look at. It's projecting 160 seats for the Conservatives, 139 for the Liberals, 28 for the Bloc, 14 for the NDP, and 2 for the Greens still. That's what they're projecting. I mean, a lot can change. That would be a Conservative minority. They wouldn't get a heck of a lot done. That's for sure. The regional, we would certainly see some regional crankiness going on if this happened. You look in Alberta and Saskatchewan, and surprising, they project a one Liberal seat gain in Saskatchewan. They have 0 right now. In Alberta, they figure one of the Liberals will lose their seat, probably one of the Randys, but maybe Chahal. And 35 Conservatives up there, but it's still solidly Conservative. But they feel that the Ontario the Liberals will overtake. This is from when some projections were getting to the point of thinking the Liberals would be down to 22 seats. That low. And suddenly it's bounced to this in the projections. Newfoundland, PEI, Nova Scotia, again, pretty solid Liberal country. New Brunswick split 5-5. Quebec, they're looking at 36 Liberals, 28 Bloc, 13 Conservatives. And BC, BC, I'll grant them. They've got, I think, some of the most pizza politics going on, variety. You just don't know what is going to come out of BC. They really got swing seats. Back in the 90s when there was Reform Party, you could have a Reform Party member, a good, solid, conservative, blue type of member in a seat down in the Lower Mainland, and right next door have a socialist NDP member in the next seat over to it. And they could flip. And it hasn't changed too much. Interior BC is still very conservative. You got 24 Conservatives there. Lower Mainland, though, they're looking at 13 Liberals, 5 NDP, and of course Elizabeth May's little green holdout there on Salt Spring Island. And again, these are projections. They're difficult. But it certainly has changed. You need 172 seats to make a majority, and nobody under this projection will win that if this holds. I mean, again, we've got a campaign just about to begin. We got all those issues to look at. And the polls are all over the map. I'm going to call up ECOS to start. Now, this is a poll that you really got to take this with a grain of salt. ECOS is owned by Frank Graves. Frank Graves is a character, to say the least. He has been very vocal with his pro-Liberal support and his outright loathing of the Conservative Party. And it says a lot about polls that his polls turn out to be the most supportive of the Liberals out of everybody's. It does mean that he's letting his bias slip into his polling. So you really can't take his polls very seriously. It's very difficult to. And of course, so you look at that spike over on the end for the people who are watching this graphically. It shows, of course, the curve. A lot of people have probably seen these poll spikes, and the blue line is getting higher and higher over the last couple of years as the Conservatives are gaining more support, and the Liberals are going down, 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 just plummeting under Trudeau. And then just in the last couple of weeks, the Liberals spike right up, the Conservatives plummet, the NDP plummet, and the Liberals actually pass the Conservatives. He's got them at 38.4% support for the Liberals, 37% for the Conservatives, down to 11.8% for the NDP. Is it possible? I guess, maybe. But you see, as I said, he's probably, as far as I'm concerned, especially due to his past public statements, the least credible pollster of them all out there. Though there's no doubt that there has been a bounce. The Liberals have been going up in the polls. So we'll go to Leger next. And they're talking now about, here's some of the difference. They say 43% Conservative, 30% Liberal. So that's like 14 or 15% deviation from ECOS. Massive. Who do you trust with these? One of them's wrong. Terribly wrong. I'm more inclined to think it's ECOS that's wrong just because he's shown such bias. It does also check with Mark Carney as leader. It thinks it would rise 3 more points. They think it would do better if, assuming Carney's in there, to 33%, while Conservative would drop down to 41%. But it's showing a pretty strong Conservative thing. But again, quite a ways from that 20-point spread that was there before. So they definitely have tightened. That's where, again, Poilievre has to endear himself with the public. He's got to find a way to connect with them, because even with the polls like, Leger, it's not as crazy as Frank Graves. They're definitely, though, losing some ground, or had. I mean, this also shows that there was a bounce recently, so the Conservatives kind of went up 5 points. That's a really volatile electorate. When you're talking week by week, 5-point changes, and you're not even into the campaign yet, this is going to be a rough and tumble campaign, folks. Numbers, unless there's a particular disaster hits or something like that, you don't see them swing too much throughout a campaign. Now, David Coletto with Abacus, I like him. He does very large polls. He does regular polls. And I'm not liking him just because his polls tend to support Conservatives. He seems to really dig in the deepest on these. And as you can see, this is a chart of his work over the last few years and ongoing polls, constant polls. It shows the same thing. It shows a Conservative drop in the last couple of weeks and a Conservative spike, a Liberal spike, I should say, and the NDP collapse. So, they're all correlating to a degree. But still, again, the outliers, when we're hitting other polls that are saying that they're neck and neck, this one's saying there's 12 points between the Conservatives and the Liberals. But the trending, look at the trending for the people who can see the graph. Anyways, the Liberals are trending up. Trending is important. It's everything. It's momentum. So as Dave was saying, he feels that Carney is going to call that election very quickly after being crowned as the leader of the Liberal Party. It makes sense. It makes sense. You want to get in, as I said, strike while the iron's hot, while you got the momentum. If you wait much longer, things can turn around, and they're very hard to turn around. Right now, you're on an upward swing. See if you can run a quick campaign and capitalize on that and pull it off. And meanwhile, Poilievre, his momentum is going downwards, which again makes anybody in a war room start to sweat a little. It's not time to push the panic button yet by any means, but you've got to reevaluate where you were going. You obviously aren't appealing to the electorate quite as much as you had been before. The question is it Trudeau enough? People were sick of him. There's no doubt about that. But will people really embrace Carney and think he's going to change things that much from where Trudeau was? I guess we'll see. That's what the campaign's all going to be about. So as we go through this, guys, I'm going to be covering this every week. We're going to give highlights. We're going to give updates. I'm going to pull up every poll I can. That's one of the great things during election time. Don't worry, there will be many, many polls. And they're imperfect, as I just showed. They're all over. So that's why I'll kind of report on a number of polls and just we'll try and extrapolate as well as we can what's going on with those things, because you can't go with just one because they're all over the map. But it's still the best tool we have to kind of look at things before an actual election is held. So we'll look at the polls, we'll look at the issues, we'll report on things. Next week, there is going to be a new Liberal leader. I'm assuming it's Carney. We don't know. So be sure to tune in. If there's more stuff you want covered on this, contact, westernstandard.news, send a note there. It'll get to me. We can check into things. We can look at things. We can report on things. We're going to cover this election all the way to the end. We got a few months of extra show time for it. Plus, my show is on Wednesdays live at noon Mountain Standard Time. Tune into it then. We got Nigel with Hannaford. Fantastic show. All of these things on the Western Standard channels. It's like they keep saying on all these digital things. It's true. Share the links, guys. Spread the word. Get more people out there. This again helps us not just with the subscriptions, but getting viewers, getting out there, sharing that, having this discourse, having independent media. It's so important. So thanks for watching this one, guys. Tune into the future shows. We've got, hopefully productive, definitely exciting times ahead of us anyways, no matter how we look at it. And eventually we'll be reporting live with the election results, and hopefully Canada will be in a better position. So thanks for tuning in. We'll see you on the next one.
What does success mean to you? Peace of mind? Financial freedom? Generational wealth? What do you see in your future? Investing in gold and silver can help you get there. Through our trading partners, New World Precious Metals offers safe, affordable, secure international accounts to help you meet your unique financial goals. Connect with one of our experienced team members. Invest in gold and silver today.